Editing is the process of selecting the best photographs from everything that you shot on your story and sequencing it in a strong narrative. This is perhaps the most difficult part of the post-production process because it requires you to be brutally honest about your work. Your final edit is going to have considerably fewer images in it than everything that you shot for your story. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the different types of images that need to be brought together to drive those two crucial elements of a photojournalistic story, pace and power. We will explore these ideas by taking a look at some photographs from a story that I shot in rural Southwest America in the run-up to the 2000 presidential elections. What we want to do when we edit our work is create a narrative out of the photographs that we shot in our story. A narrative that has some pace and power to it, a narrative in which the sequencing of the images moves the story along and carries the viewer's interest along with it. What we're going to do is take a look at a series of photographs and how each one of these photographs represents a different type of image. Each of these types represent one of the fundamental building blocks out of which we construct this narrative that has the pace and the power that we're looking for. The first frame we're looking at is an establishing shot. This is very often a wide-angle photograph that anchors the story that we're trying to tell in a particular place or location. This is a set of pictures that I took in that part of America that George Bush and Al Gore came from. George Bush from Texas and Al Gore from Tennessee. These were the two candidates, one Republican, one Democrat, who were running for President of the United States. This second frame is an example of what we call an extreme close-up. This is another essential building block of the photojournalistic narrative, the type of image that helps us create an emotional connection between the viewer and the subject of the story. The next type of photograph that we need to consider is what's very often called a verb shot. A verb shot is a shot in which somebody is doing something. And this kind of photograph has some action driving it. It's not as static as an establishing shot. It's not as static as a portrait can sometimes be. This kind of photograph invariably has some action in it. People doing something that explains what the situation is about. In this case, you have the sheriff and his deputy arresting a young man on the streets of this West Texas town. This frame is another one of the basic building blocks of the photojournalistic narrative. This is an environmental portrait. We'll discuss this particular kind of photograph in more depth in a subsequent lesson, but here, in order to understand the narrative structure that we're trying to establish, here you can see the relationship of the environmental portrait to the other types of images that we've had so far. The establishing shot, the extreme close-up, the verb shot. Next in line is the environmental portrait. This shot is different from all of the others that we've seen so far, most obviously because of its orientation. This is a vertical shot, and again provides one of the essential building blocks of a photojournalistic narrative. This kind of frame gives a magazine or newspaper designer the ability to create a cover photograph. This kind of composition achieves two things at the same time. It gets across the photographer's intention of constructing part of the narrative. At the same time, it leaves enough real estate at the top of the frame for the newspaper or magazine designer to play around with the topography that's so essential to creating a cover image. And lastly, we've got the detail shot. A detail shot is a way of establishing for the reader a very specific aspect of the story that you're trying to tell. It's a way of zooming in on an aspect of somebody's life or an aspect of a situation that you're trying to describe and show what the story is on an almost atomic level. And here, for example, we've got the hands of a Tennessee tobacco farmer. The background to Al Gore's candidacy is this rural part of Tennessee from which he came, which is tobacco growing country. We've looked at the various building blocks that make up a photojournalistic story, the different types of photographs that you need to consider when you want to move your narrative along. We can now see a kind of pace that moves through the story we're trying to tell. The story, in broad strokes, the story is, what does this America that George Bush and Al Gore want to be the president of look like? Who are the people that are going to be voting for these candidates? If we look at the photographs, we begin to understand we've got the establishing shot that shows what rural America looks like. We've then got the extreme close-up that takes us into a very intimate look at the American voter in that part of America. We move on to an interesting juxtaposition between the old voter and the young voter. From that, we move on to our verb shot, our little piece of action in rural America. This is everyday life out on the streets of West Texas. From that, we move on to an extreme close-up, a detail shot of a pair of hands of the tobacco worker, the tobacco farmer, which gives us a very revealing glimpse at the life of a rural American voter. And we conclude with a rather romantic shot of life on a Texas cattle farm, which is a photograph that can also be used by a magazine or a newspaper's graphic designer as a possible cover shot for a story. In this assignment, I'd like you to shoot a story about somebody going shopping for food. It can be in a small market or a large supermarket, but I would like you to edit the photographs to show a logical sequence of the process of shopping for food, from the time the person left home to the time they returned with their purchases. Before you actually go out to shoot the photographs, I want you to devote some time to thinking about the kinds of images that you're going to need. This is a process called storyboarding, thinking about the photographs that you need before you actually go out to shoot. Think about the process of shopping and what kinds of images you're going to have to look for. Your final set of photographs should be between 10 and 15 images.